Hey everyone, it's Dale, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about quote style. As I mentioned in class, there's only one way to style a direct quote, and you see it there on the screen. You'll notice open quote mark, the first complete sentence of a direct quote goes here, comma inside the quote mark, and then some attribution. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. Just learn this one way. Don't try to break up that first complete quote. Don't put the attribution at the beginning. It's that way. It's that simple. Just learn this one way and you'll be golden, I promise. So again, when you have a direct quote, you have the first complete sentence, comma inside the quote mark, and then some attribution. We'll talk about paraphrasing here in a little bit, but titles become really important here. Make sure you're reading that AP style book. Like I said in class, I tend to just put the title after the name. That's just the way I learned it. The only attribution word we use is said, so remember to keep that in mind when you're using quote style. And there is a variance in how you whether you put said before the name or after the name. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Again, here's another look at that one quote and how you should style a one-line quote. So the first complete sentence of a direct quote goes here, comma inside the quote mark, said Dale Blasingame, comma, a professor at Texas State University. Okay? So when your quote only has one sentence, you put the attribution after the first complete sentence. When your quote has two or more sentences, it appears like this. Still easy to remember because the first complete sentence is the first part of the quote. So same thing. For open quote mark, the first complete sentence of a direct quote goes here, comma inside the quote mark, attribution, period. Then you start a new quote mark, and then you put the rest of your sentences there and close the quote. Okay? So when you have two or more sentences, first complete sentence, then the attribution, then the rest of the sentences. Okay? Just learn that one way. I promise you it will save you a ton of headaches. I talked about that there's a difference between where you put the said and the name. So if you're using a quote from someone, it's the first time you've referenced them, you obviously have to include their first and last name, and you also have to include a title because we have no idea who this person is that you're quoting. So when that's the case, said goes before the name. And then in that case, you typically want the title going after the name. So you'll see there the first complete sentence of direct quote goes here, said Dale Blasingame, comma, a professor at Texas State University. You could say said Texas State University Professor Dale Blasingame, but that's a long way to get to the name. You want the name and said to be close to each other. So that's why I recommend the title coming after the name in that situation. If you've already referenced that person in a story, then you only need the last name in your quote. So the bottom there is an example of when you would how you would do that, and in that case the name comes first and then said. So if you haven't referenced them and you're using first and last name and a title, said comes before the name. If you already have referenced them, name and then said. Simple enough. You'll get the hint, or you'll get the hang of it as we continue to move on with the semester, but I cannot stress how important this is. One last thing regarding quote style. Direct quotes are their own paragraphs. Do not include them with a previous paragraph. Direct quotes stand alone as their own paragraphs. So here's an example of what a story would look like as you're moving your way down. Dale Blasingame, a professor at Texas State University, spent Thursday discussing quote style. There's my quote. It's its own paragraph. Then I move on to the rest of the story, starting a new paragraph after the quote. Okay? That last line there is really important because quote style errors are a 25-point deduction on stories. Learn quote style. It's simple. I promise you. There's one way to do it. Just learn that one way and you'll be good to go. Okay? So what is a paraphrase? A paraphrase is when you're taking information from someone that could potentially be a direct quote, but you don't really need a direct quote at that point in the story, or what they said is boring, or they may have had poor grammar when they said it, or it was too short. So what you do is you take that information, you attribute it to the person, but then you paraphrase it. You put it in your own words, staying as close to the original quote as possible because you don't want to change what they say. But you can rephrase it a little bit if you need to. You do not use quote marks when you paraphrase. So here would be a paraphrase of something I said. According to Dale Blasingame, a professor at Texas State University, direct quotes are the exact words spoken by a source. You can structure the sentence of a paraphrase in several ways. You don't have to start each one with according to. You could say direct quotes are the exact words spoken by a source, comma, Blasingame said, or that would be, of course, if you've referenced me before. So don't think you have to structure your paraphrases exactly like this. We showed this example in class, but here's a good example of when to paraphrase and when to use a direct quote. If you interviewed someone and they said firefighters got here at 5 p.m., that's boring. That adds nothing to your story. If you really need that time information, so let's say the call went out at 3:30 and firefighters didn't get there until 5, that's some relevant information. It took an hour and a half to respond to this fire, but that quote is boring, so you wouldn't want to use that. You'd want to paraphrase that information. However, if that person said firefighters got here just in time to save my baby, that's a good quote. So you want to use that quote. You want to find a place for it in your story.